Hi, everybody. Welcome to another SR Talk. My name is Ornella de Gasperin. I'm a professor in ecology in Mexico, and I'll be hosting this session. Just so you know, we are recording this talk and we'll be uploading it later on to our YouTube channel. So at the end of the session, when we're in the question and answer, if you want to turn on your camera, just remember that's going to go into YouTube. So we can also ask the question for you if you type it in the chat. So I'm going to introduce our speaker. I'm very happy to have Charles here. So Charles Stevenson is a scholar activist at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. He's synthesizing policies for a European degrowth transition. He got his political teeth during the XR uprising of 2018-2019, and he's also writing about strategy for social and ecological transformation. So thank you very much, Charles. I'm very happy to have you here. And I'll share my screen to share your slides, and then I give you the screen.
Amazing. Can you hear me all right? Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Ornella. Thank you for the invitation to speak, and thank you, Paula, for the interpretation. I really don't take your attention for granted, all of you. I know that we spend too much time on Zoom, so it gives me a lot of hope that you all decided it was worth your time to have a discussion this evening about degrowth and political strategy. As Ornella said, I'm Charles, all pronouns welcome, and I'm gonna talk about degrowth and revolutionary strategy for social ecological transformation. Now, the nice thing about this talk is I can skip the whole section that explains how dire the situation we face today is. You all know that to a world of staggering injustice coupled with climate and ecological emergency, we've seen escalating conflict and what the Israeli genocide expert Raz Segal has called a textbook case of genocide. I echoed the sentiments of Friday for Future Sweden, who wrote that we refuse to let the public focus shift away from the horrifying human suffering that Palestinians are currently facing. And yet life goes on. We all get up and go about our daily lives as the climate, human, and biodiversity clocks tick down. As the philosopher Walter Benjamin put it, quote, "The concept of progress must be grounded in the idea of catastrophe, that things are status quo is the catastrophe. It is not an ever-present possibility, but what in each case is given. Thus, hell is not something that awaits us, but this life here and now." Next slide, please, Ornella. So as activists, we often say that we're running out of time, that we must act now to avoid a catastrophic future. It's true that we must act now, but it implies that the catastrophe is not here already. So let me ask you, how could things be more catastrophic, for example, for the citizens of Gaza? Understanding that we already live in barbaric times liberates our thinking to develop serious strategies that will allow us to confront these crises. First, though, now that I've suitably depressed us all, I have some good news. And the good news is that the solutions to our interlocking social and ecological crises, for the most part, are already here. And they can be begun to be implemented tomorrow using existing technologies. So degrowth offers a framework for combining these policies. Crucially, degrowth is not a call for less of what we have, but for a completely different economy centered around fulfilling human needs within planetary boundaries. It is a call for increased development in every community that lacks access to food, housing, education, healthcare, energy, water, and meaningful work. Can we actually do this? The data here are very promising. A 2020 paper by my colleague Joel Millard-Hopkins and colleagues on the REAL project shows that we can provide decent living standards, including advanced appliances like laptops and washing machines, for a population of 10 billion humans with an energy consumption equal to that of the 1970s. Now that's just energy consumption, but it gives you an idea of what could be possible. On the REAL project, we are currently working on policy packages that center around a job guarantee, universal public services, working time reductions, and a care income. These are incredibly exciting proposals that, if implemented, could end social deprivation and involuntary unemployment while reducing our energy and resource use. Are we able to pay for all of this? Now, those of you who are interested in political economy will know that context matters here. But thanks to the insights from modern monetary theorists, we know that the real limits to public spending reside in the productive capacity of our economies, not the arbitrary fiscal rules that Keir Starmer and his ilk like to talk about. As the economist John Maynard Keynes liked to put it, anything we can actually do, we can afford. And recent ecological macroeconomic modeling has backed this up and shown that it's possible to maintain economic stability throughout a degrowth transition, creating jobs and reducing inequality while lifting people out of poverty. At its heart, degrowth is about imagining a world of radical abundance in which we all have more of what matters without destroying our life support systems and the wealth of biodiversity that surrounds us. For anyone who is looking for a dose of optimism, I cannot recommend highly enough Jason Hickel's book, Less is More. So next slide. I knew I was going to be bad at with the slides. So this is the important point that degrowth does not mean reduced development in the global south, but a convergence of living standards between the north and the south. And I can ask the next slide, please. There we go. So another world is possible, but we will achieve it, and this is crucial, only on conditions that we break with the status quo, our catastrophic status quo. Next slide, please. Okay, so do we need degrowth in the first place? Aren't we able to decouple the growth of our economies from their ecological impact? Well, this is the most recent assessment of so-called absolute decoupling, and it shows that even those countries whose emissions are falling while their gross domestic product is rising are doing so at nowhere close to the rate that would be required to stay within Paris Agreement targets. And this is just CO2, right? As many of us know, proponents of green growth have a way of exhibiting carbon tunnel vision and ignoring concerns that seem trivial to them, like the sixth mass extinction of life on Earth. I don't know if many of you have had a chance to engage with Hannah Ritchie's recent book, but the argument is based around the assumption that the falling price of renewable energy will mean that renewables outcompete fossil fuels. And sadly, our economies are structured around profitability, not price. And there is absolutely zero empirical evidence for this claim. There's a new book coming out by Brett Christophers, which goes into this argument in more detail. But at its core, green growth or techno-optimism is a deeply unscientific field, and we should engage with it only when it can contend with the critiques being leveled at it from Earth system scientists. Next slide, please. Now, there we go. So I would be remiss if I wasn't also critical of my own field. Many proponents of degrowth favor a definition that looks something like this. So you have a growth-centered economy in the global north in rich countries, which requires a brief period of contraction, degrowth, followed by a steady state post-growth economy. Now, I don't think much of this definition because it fails to account for the political impasse that we currently face. Given the crises we all know about, given the concurrent rise of the far right and the threats to basic civil liberties, the only thing we can be sure of is transition away from what we currently know towards something new. Adam Tooze writes that, quote, "To talk as if we can safely distinguish between the short, medium, and long term is one of the insidious forms of soft denial at work today." We know that the ruptures and revolutions of the 21st century aren't just on their way, they are here already. The question now is who will have the political power and organization to shape them. Next slide, please. The point I'm trying to make is that ecological crises aren't economic or environmental, they are political. If we all entered into rebellion, it's because we recognize this. We recognize that our current model of science policy advice is broken. People like me develop policy proposals, and we expect benevolent policymakers to take them up and enact them in their evidence-based policymaking. But this chain of events is a complete fairy tale. When I first started out in science, I was intent on becoming a science communicator. I saw the wonderful research being done. I saw the train wreck that was actual policymaking. And I reasoned that surely, if good ideas were communicated better, the system wouldn't be such a mess. What I was missing in my analysis was power. I didn't understand that politics doesn't work like science. don't get me wrong, I know there's a lot of politics and science, but broadly within academia, if your argument has a strong empirical or theoretical basis, it will be heard. In politics, however, you can have all the evidence you want. If you don't hold power, your ideas never come to fruition. So thank you to my colleague, Judith, who's on this call, who encouraged me to emphasize this point. To me, this has been a central flaw of the climate movement to date. We've treated climate breakdown as an informational crisis. We've worked from the premise that if we explain that it poses an existential threat, we will be heard. And we've won on a communication level. The waves of protests that Ornella began with, that began with Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion in Europe, changed the conversation completely. It's easy to forget that we didn't even use phrases like climate crisis or ecological emergency prior to 2018 in the global north. System change has been much harder to come by. The reason for that is our activism remains focused on asking those in power to please be a little less terrible at their jobs, right? Even groups such as Climate Defiance or Just Stop Oil, and all my respect to their incredible work, to be clear, they expect climate action to be taken by the same governments who have gotten us here in the first place. It's never about taking power away from them. There was a recent action that secured Climate Defiance a meeting with the White House, and after that they tweeted, "Direct action works." But what do you get from a meeting with the White House? You get an acknowledgement that the situation is dire, and that they're doing everything they can given the constraints of the system. And then Joe Biden goes back to licensing drilling on federal land and sending weapons to be used on Palestinian kids. So we have to stop confusing access for power. Next slide, please. Assata Shakur put it this way: nobody in the world, nobody in history has ever gotten their freedom by appealing to the moral sense of the people who are oppressing them. What does this mean? It means shifting our gaze from those in power to those who could potentially take it away from them. It means accepting that we will not win simply by reacting to each new terrible policy announcement, and that achieving our demands will take time. It means shifting from being lobbyists and campaigners to being organizers in our workplaces and our communities. There simply aren't enough of us to win on our own. Next slide, please. We have to stop treating ecological crises, as I was saying, as informational crises. And to start treating them as a political crisis. This means thinking about ecological breakdown as we do about poverty. It's a structural feature of our economic system, not a bug. It persists despite most people being informed and concerned. And this is in large part thanks to you all, thanks to the work that has been done by the climate movement. And it has been confronted historically by the collective action of mass movements. So where does this leave us as scientists? Well, we're better at information, aren't we? We know how to process data and to write succinctly. We aren't trained in politics. But just because we're a hammer doesn't mean that everything's a nail, right? So can we recognize that our skill set isn't well adapted to this moment? Next slide, please. I know that every person on this call does understand that because you decided to get involved in politics. Scientist Rebellion isn't beyond politics. This is politics, and politics is always a collective act. So I want to thank each and every one of you for taking that step. I know that it comes at a professional cost. And my invitation for us all is to get better at doing politics. Let's refine our theories of change. Let's get a political education. The first step is joining an organization, and we've done that already. So the question I would like us to start asking is, where do we want to be in 10 years? Because even if we start decarbonization today, these crises will still be with us. So do we want to be in a position of asking people like Javier Milei and Rishi Sunak to act on the science? Or do we want to be in organizations that have a chance of taking power away from them and creating the world we know is possible? One of my favorite political theorists and revolutionaries is Antonio Gramsci, pictured here, and he had a real sense of obligation towards his fellow citizens. He believed that the privilege of all the education he received meant that he should use it for the benefit of all. So in 1924, when Italy voted in a fascist government, as they did again recently, his reaction wasn't, oh, well, these idiots don't know what's good for them. He felt the personal sense of failure, that he'd let his fellows down. And I hope we can retain that spirit this year as climate deniers like Keir Starmer and Narendra Modi are voted into power. Concretely, as scientists, there are a few points that I think are crucial. I think that we need to start connecting to a critical mass of everyday people, or we're not going to win. That means we need to learn to work with mass organizations like trade unions that can act as a bridge. And we need to connect ecological demands with social demands. If we don't, we're doomed to failure. We will solve the cost of living crisis at the same time as the climate crisis, or we will solve neither. That's why it's social ecological transformation. It's both at the same time. Next slide, please. For me, rebellion is not enough. We need disciplined revolutionary organizations. And I'll end with a quote by Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote that there's no reason why good cannot triumph as often as evil. The triumph of anything is a matter of organization. If there is such a thing as angels, I hope that they're organized along the lines of the mafia. Thank you very much. I really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you for that excellent talk. So before we start the question and answer, if it's okay with everybody, I'll share my own screen, give a very short 2-minute introduction of SR, and then we can jump to the question and answer so you guys can think of things you want to discuss with Charles. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? It's all good. So we're Scientist Rebellion. We're the group that organized this talk, and I think it fits perfectly after what Charles said. So if we go back in time, basically all governments promised to protect us from the climate catastrophe. They all decided to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. And this was in the year 1992, so when I was 4 years old. Today, there are 60% more CO2 in the atmosphere than back then. Now, every year we see catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. These are just examples from 2023. And we're reaching a point where basically 41 people are being displaced, mainly women and children, because of the emissions of a tiny elite. And if we see the climate catastrophe, we really see, that this is a social injustice. So the richest 10% of people hold almost 80% of the wealth, suffer 3% of the cost, and cause 48% of the emissions. And then the poorest people are suffering basically 75% of the costs and produce 2% of the emissions. Now, the science has been very clear for decades, and in 2022, they gave a final warning. They said any further delay in concerted anticipatory global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Now, despite this warning, governments now are planning to produce twice as much fossil fuels as by 2030 that would be compatible with limit warming to 1.5. And as Charles says, this is not a problem of communication. We've had 28 Conference of the Parties, 6 IPCC assessment reports, and we've had meeting after meeting, report after report. This is not a matter of communication. The science is clear. This is a problem of power, basically money and power. And we just have to accept that we don't change the world by communicating the problem. So Scientist Rebellion basically engages with the way social change happens. So we're a global movement formed basically by scientists and academics of all disciplines and all levels. We engage in civil disobedience, protest, and disruption, and we're always changing what we do based on new input. We're decentralized and horizontal, and we have working groups in over 30 countries. So if you want to learn more about us, you can send us an email or check our website. We have country-level actions and international synchronized protests. There is a lot of backstage work as well in social media and communication. And now we have over 50 members facing trial, so you can also help us by donating to them. So get in touch. And with that said, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I'll pass it back to anybody who has questions for Charles. So Charles, do you want me to read the questions or would you like to?
Yeah, I saw there's already a great one from Vlad in the chat about connecting degrowth with union organizing. So maybe I could take a stab at that and we can go from there. This is what I said we should be doing, right? So I should have an answer to this. And I think that the first thing that we need to overcome when we talk about unions is that most unions today are not militant organizations, right? And they engage in what might be called business unionism, which sees their role quite narrowly as trying to improve their members' their members' pay predominantly in working conditions without viewing themselves within the context of a larger intersectional interconnected movement, right? And so working already within unions to make them more militant and political is a first really important step. And this points to the importance of us all joining unions, but specifically how to connect degrowth with unions. I see there are very clear demands here, and an immediate one would be working time reductions, right? This is a historic demand which trade unions have used to achieve incredible changes in social life. I'm talking about the weekend. If we have weekends, it is because of the struggle of trade unions. And so the shifting from a 5-day working week to a 30 or a 25-hour working week is a key demand which unions around the world should be taking up. And this is, I mean, maybe it's not obvious, but this is a clear degrowth demand in that reducing the amount of working time has clear ecological benefits as well. I don't know how you'd like to do this, Ornella. Should I?
What's more comfortable for you? If you want to like pick the question, or
I think if I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by the chat, so if you
okay.
want to size a little bit and maybe ask what seems useful.
Okay. Also, people can raise their hand, and I can give you the word, so we can actually like have a chat. If people are comfortable with their, you can also not turn on your camera.
Yeah, please. I'd like to see more of you. Disagree with me. I don't have all the answers.
Yes, Rose. Hi.
Hi. Really cool talk, Charles. Thanks. I always struggle with the idea that in order to do something, you have to not do something else. And so I'm wondering, when you think about this skill set that we currently have and the skill set that we're building, like I'm talking about the scientist community generally, what kinds of things like do we have to not do so that we can do? And then I also would, if you're done, I have another question about what you think about citizens assemblies, but that's all. Check.
Amazing. Thanks, Rose. So I'll answer as we go along. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's really important that strategy involves not doing one thing in favor of doing something else. And I feel like that gets sometimes lost in conversations within the environmental movement because we want people to be engaged and we say like anything is better than nothing, right? But everyone who's here is engaged. You've decided to take your Tuesday night to think about political strategy. And so I think it's important for us to improve to improve where we need to be better. And to go back to the question of unions, I see like a key difference between kind of climate activists and their media presence as opposed to union leaders. If we look at, for example, Sean Fain in the States with the UAW or Mick Lynch in the UK, their media presence is incredible. Their ability to stay on message is frankly outstanding, and I think we have a lot to learn there. So that's just one example of getting involved in politics means disciplined political interventions. And your point about citizens' assemblies, I'm a fan personally. I think we need them, but we should also be cognizant of the limited political reach they can have. And again, this is a little bit related to the like access for power point. But just because you have a citizens' assembly doesn't mean it has any power. And if we look at, for example, like the Assemblée citoyenne pour le climat in France, it produced very radical demands, and they were ignored by the government because it was given no teeth, right? So citizens' assembly are important, but we shouldn't see them as a substitute for fighting power.
Thanks, Charles. So I'll go in order as people raise their hand, if that's okay. So the next question is by Santiago.
Hi, Charles. Thanks a lot for the excellent talk. Until recently, I saw a huge gap and abyss between the state of the world we have and the state of the world we want to have. And it was just recently through learning more about degrowth and modern monetary theory that I finally saw some of those bridges that allow us to get there in an easy way. All of the policies that are presented by degrowth and monetary theory combined seem to have huge support in the public wherever you look. They should be easily implementable if we have sorry, a message appeared here. If we have the right people in power that want to implement them, or if we put enough pressure to change them, but there's a feasible path to get us there. And I know for the global north, for countries in the global north, that's basically where we want to start and want to achieve these changes in the global north. But I also see that in countries in the global south, these are policies that should be widely popular, and they should help those countries get to the same happy place we want. But I see way less things of how these policies could be implemented and whether there are some risks for countries in the global south for implementing them.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much, Santi. I totally agree with you with regard to utopia. I think this is one of the strengths of degrowth, is that it allows us to imagine another world, but it's not just degrowth. And I think that there's been a wealth of recent interventions and books that allow us to think kind of beyond capitalism. And for a long time, we were stuck in what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism, that we couldn't imagine an alternative. And now we can imagine the alternative, and we need to get serious about the transition and how we get from our current catastrophe to that alternative that we know is possible. And with regard to the global south, I would just say that I wouldn't underestimate the power dynamics again at play here, and the fact that the global south is under kind of neo-colonial relations of debt primarily, right? And this constrains their ability to embrace the kinds of policies that you were discussing. So I'm just going to share there's a paper by my supervisor which I really like, and I'll share it in the chat, called "How to Achieve Full Decolonization." It's a bold title, but it kind of gets into the contradictions that you were alluding to, and I think it's a nice way of thinking through the kind of north-south dilemma.
Thanks, Charles. The next person is William.
Yes, thank you very much for this talk and this presentation. My question is degrowth a narrative, a program? How should we implement it? Because, for example, we don't have a narrative, and that's the problem with citizen assemblies. When we say, oh, we'll do citizen assemblies, we cannot take everyone with us because it's not inspiring to do just citizen assembly. We do citizen assembly for something that we want. So how does degrowth go towards something that we want? Because like in my area, we don't know how to live with mosquito sticks, with Lassa virus. We just don't have narratives of living with other beings. We only have more. So how does that, how do you relate? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, William. I totally agree with you. I think whether we call it degrowth or we call it something else, I think that depends on context, and local organizations will know what's most appropriate for their communities. But for me, what matters is the content. It's these policies that have the potential to liberate us, right? Job guarantee, universal public services, and these apply both in the global north and in the global south in different ways. And that's why I talked about radical abundance, right? We need to kind of reclaim what it means to have more. I think this is I think that there is an inspiring vision here. This idea of more time with our families, more time for what matters in life, less stress, freedom from the fear of environmental collapse, freedom from pollution. This is an inspiring vision, and whether it's communicated through the word degrowth or not, I think depends on the context, right?
Thank you, Charles. The next person is Theo.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for the talk. It was really inspiring. I completely agree with you on the question of well, of power and of the lack of disciplined revolutionary organization, no, as you put it. And yeah, and it seems sometimes we have troubles as the ecological movements to actually learn from all the labor movements that has been very strong in Europe in the past, and all the different traditions from the left, no, that we have, and all that great history. You know, it makes me think that sometimes we forget that ecology without class struggle is gardening, you know, as we say it. And so there is this very rich tradition that we can learn from. And also, I was wondering if you had encountered the thought of Murray Bookchin in that context and of social ecology, because it's really a very nice synthesis of ecology, Marxism, and anarchism, no? And it makes a great connection also to the discussion on the link between North and South, because these ideas have been picked up in different regions. Well, like the Zapatistas in Chiapas or the Kurdish movement in Rojava, and yeah, and they have a lot to teach us also for how we're going to change things in the global north. And in return, in the global north, we have a lot to do to support them and to really yeah, bring like more internationalism in all of this, no? So yeah, I just wondered if you had come across these ideas, and how you would suggest maybe scientific rebellion could, you know, create that internationalist support, no, with global South movements that are really reinventing these new institutions and these new political movements that I guess we will need also here. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks too. Yeah, I really, of course, admire the work of Bookchin. Everybody should go read him if they haven't. I think these are essential interventions, as long as they don't distract us from also working within institutions. And I think as you put it, we need to take into account the global political economy and institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. And these are institutions, to go back to this kind of Santi's question, whose power needs to be overcome if we're going to have social ecological transformation outside of kind of the global north, right? So yeah, I guess it's like so much to say, but go read Murray Bookchin, everyone. And before maybe we get to Yefim just got his PhD, so congratulations, Yefim. And he's been thinking about this for longer than I have. So don't just ask a question. Maybe give us your own thoughts, because yeah, this is an actual doctor in a social ecological transformation.
Go for it, Yefim.
We can't hear you, buddy.
Maybe I'll jump with the next person to see if in the meantime we fix your mic. Otherwise, you can also type it. And there is one question in the chat that it says, do you think we can realistically make the transition with businesses, or is it something you see if only able to mobilize at the citizen individual level? From Chloe.
Yeah, so I think that we need to look at I think we need to look at the role that businesses play in today's political economy, right? And this isn't an attack on all businesses, but the overwhelming majority of lobbying that happens today from a business perspective goes against environmental regulation and social protections. So I think we just need to be cognizant of the fact that there are interests that go against the kinds of policies that we're talking about, which are they're economic, right? Businesses are under a lot of pressure themselves, and that means that they often act as the bad guys in the kinds of political debates that we're talking about. It doesn't mean that our future our degrowth future doesn't have businesses. It just means that they might look different than they do today, and they might be democratized and acting towards social and ecological objectives rather than like their own bottom line.
Thanks, Charles. Jefim, do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, excellent.
Right, yeah. Thanks so much, Charles. That was great, and I agree with 99% of that. So I'm going to try to go to the provocation part that you were asking for. So I work kind of in climate education to some extent currently, and you said, and I agree largely that we're not in a crisis of information or communication, and yet here we are, communicating and. You were talking about the example of like trade unions and like they're not doing the right thing, and I agree. But how do we get from that point to the point where they're all like radicalized and kind of like working towards the right thing? Isn't there some element of information there? So is it a question of different kind of information, not talking about climate impacts, but talking about like power and political transformation and stuff? Or where do you see the role for that? Is that any route to change?
Yeah, thanks for that, Yefim. I want to hear other people's thoughts on this. It's hard, right? And this looks different in different places. And I use trade unions kind of as an example. I think there is important work to be done there, but it doesn't mean that we focus all of our energy necessarily on the trade union movement, right? And I think that like when we're thinking about this in a context specific manner, there are other projects sometimes that'll be more applicable to that. So some places very much need a new political party, right? Because existing institutions don't work. My family from the US needs a new mass party, right? Because at the moment we have two corporate parties, right? But that looks different in different places. And this is the kind of the point, like the structures that we need to struggle aren't necessarily always there. So we need to start building those.
Yeah, can I just follow up on that? Because the point was more like, if we want to win people over for, organizing whatever it is in trade unions and political parties, isn't there something that, that they currently don't either understand or focus on that they need to know, right? Isn't there like some information, whether that information is about power structures, is about how change happens? That's my point, like
sorry. Okay. Yeah.
I think there is a role for information, just it's less about climate physics and more about political power and stuff.
Well, this is why I talked about the need for political education, right? It's about understanding that actually the world we live in isn't an inevitability, first thing, right? Like it doesn't have to be this way. And then the second thing is that, as Ornella said, the current arrangement benefits a tiny minority at the expense of everyone else, and we could change that collectively, right? So I think we need education, but it's more about politics and political economy than it is about physics, to your point. And
Thanks, Charles. Sorry, completely agree with that. And so join us in Scientists Rebellion. The next person is Vincent.
Can you hear me? You hear me? Yes. Yeah, actually, it's kind of linked to the last person Jefim was saying, because the thing is, how do we get the population actually sticking to that idea of growth? Because what everything is selling to us is that, for example, like the climate problem is taken as a technical issue that can be solved by actually growing economy by extractivism and mining more and replacing fossil fuel by metals. And it's going to be actually, to come back to what you said at the beginning, the status quo will be a catastrophe, but it's even worse than that. I mean, it's not, so it's getting worse. And we are selling to people that we're going to solve the problem by getting more and more extractivism and productivism. And the idea would be, how would you think, how can we convince people that we're going in the wrong direction and make a nice story or something like that?
Yeah. Thanks, Vincent. I mean, for me, I don't think most people need to be convinced that the current system isn't working, right? I think most people are struggling in a cost of living crisis, and we need to connect to those concerns and point out that this isn't, as you said, this isn't a technical issue, right? We're not just going to swap out our combustion engines for electric vehicles, and that if we actually want to get serious about tackling climate, then it means transforming our societies and our economies, and that the overwhelming majority of people stand to benefit from that transformation. I think it's that message, right? Again, to what Yefim was saying, we need to show people that their lives can be better in a climate-friendly future, right? In an ecological and a truly sustainable world, their lives will also be better. It's not about less, it's about more of what really matters.
Yeah, totally. But how do we make, how to get to this point? Because we are all in our lives and we are used to have a specific, especially us in our like Western so-called civilized and industrialized world. We think that it's getting better if we have more things. I mean,
yeah.
Here we don't, but
yeah.
what I'm saying is like, that's what we've been taught since we were born.
Yeah. I mean, this is why we need organizations, right? I'll talk about the US because it's where I'm from. But in the US, you have two parties who are offering really like depressing visions of the future, where actually things don't get materially better for most people, right? And so if we had a third party that was saying, actually, we can have good things, and we can have freedom and democracy for everyone, and you deserve freedom and democracy, and at the same time we can make our economy sustainable, right? I think a lot of people would get excited about that, right? The task of revolutionaries in the 21st century isn't to convince people that we need change. I think people are on board with the need for change. We need to convince them that change is possible and that it can go in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely.
And as we've been saying, like the policy programs are here. We have really exciting policies. Talk about utopias with your friends to begin with. Like, people get excited about this, right? I think this is why people are drawn to degrowth, because it's a positive vision of the future.
Yeah. Indeed. Thanks anyway. That was good. That was cool talk.
Thanks, Charles. Marta? Marta?
Hi, can you hear me? No.
Not really. Maybe we go to Skylar and then we try again with you, Marta.
Okay, no worries.
Now we can. Sorry. Okay, sorry. So go, Marta. Thanks.
Okay, then I guess that's fixed. I'm a bit on the go, and I had my phone and I had to disconnect them. It went all crazy. But I thanks for the lecture. That was for the talk actually. I've been looking for ideas of the growth for a bit, but I actually just wanted to I guess I wanted to add a point, because so I was in Scientist Rebellion myself, but I am. It's just the dropped out of my PhD, so I'm not much of a scientist, but I am with Dead for Climate still very intensely. And I feel like because Charles hinted at both the debt crisis and the sort of where does the utopia come from and where does the global south can contribute to that. And I think one thing that's been sort of that I think is important to keep in mind is that the global south is a huge plate, right? It's where 80% of the world is, or like 80% of the world population lives. And so it's not that there aren't ideas, it's just that they aren't heard when they're screamed out from the depths of Northeast Brazil, where I come from. So by a woman of color like my mom. Considering new ideas and what the future is supposed to look like, and we want to take into account what the global south thinks of it. It's more of an idea. We get out of the realm of speaking, because as scientists we love speaking and explaining, but here might be a place where we want to listen. We want to learn how to listen, which here in Berlin, in the Berlin University Alliance, I found out I had a very abrupt way to find out that scientists don't. They tend to be a bit more, yeah. I'm not going to make it too long, but what I want to know from Charles is what are his experiences in sort of getting scientists, or even, let's say, people with this kind of will and a kind of a power to engage, because a scientist would do hold a certain amount of power. How do we shift the conversation from talking to listening? We've been talking, but we don't take power imbalances into account. Most people in STEM are usually very, very ignorant of them to begin with, and they just don't want to listen to begin with. It's only a matter of top-down information giving. And so how do we even shift the conversation, start thinking in other ways? Also, by the way, because I'm Debt for Climate, just if anyone is interested, Debt for Climate explores this question of how the debt trap maintains neo-colonial relationships between the global north and the global south, and how that impedes the global south from sort of getting a bit more ahead in climate action.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Meta. I don't have a good answer to that. I agree with you that we need to start listening to voices that haven't been heard until now. And the only thing I'll add is maybe scientists are not those that we need to be convincing, right? Because I as you said, like these are like some of the most highly educated people in the world, but we're a tiny minority. And like many of us recognize the urgency that we face and want to get involved. And let's work with those people. And then let's actually try to listen, as you were saying, to the experiences of everyday people that are very different from the experience of everyday scientists. So I was also involved with Debt for Climate Switzerland. And what was powerful for me there was actually listening to the demands of social movements in the global south, like listening to trade unions in Argentina who have a lived experience of what it's like to be under the boot of the International Monetary Fund, right? And that was powerful. So I think maybe shifting our attention outside of academia could be a place to start with our political work in some way. But yeah. I really appreciate your intervention, Marta. And regards to Esteban and Luis, if you see them.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll forward that whenever I see him. He's also here in Berlin, but also thanks a lot. I think that's I sneak that point as a question sometimes, just to make sure scientists hear that, because it just, in my experience, and that's a huge part of why I gave up, is because I got frustrated that the conversation doesn't even start. If you're around like in a circle like this where scientists are already sort of into it and so on, but it's impossible to even start the conversation in many circles in STEM. So thanks, and yeah, I'm shutting up now.
Skylar, I think you're next.
Yeah, I wanted to add too that like in terms of business, it depends on what the model is, right? Because if you have someone who's selling, let's say, services or food or something, that's very different from a business that's like, we produce tons and tons of disposable crap, or we produce fossil fuels or something. The idea of like degrowth is like, okay, that doesn't stop me from getting like a vegan sandwich at the bodega, with compostable packaging. That's not our problem. And the thing too, like with the fossil fuel industry, is like there's literally, from a psychology standpoint, there's literally antisocial personality disorders in many of these execs, which are why they're like, they need just these, godlike amounts of money, and they're willing to destroy the society over it. I've met plenty of small business owners that were like, sure, let's expand transit. It's like, it's about people. It's not about wrecking the planet and stuff. And, like the power is not evenly distributed even within that. Even you think about within a business, you got all these different workers, but then the power is often up at the head of that. All of that, the more you can even it out, because there's a lot of folks who, you work for a company, but it's ultimately like you just want to provide for your family and stuff and have a stable livelihood, right? So, I wouldn't entirely write off business because of the people involved so much as just figuring out who are the key problematic people who are at the top, who are holding all the power, who are just dismantling the environment at a systemic level. It's like, I mean, who are the top lobbying companies? It might be like auto companies and manufacturing and stuff. I don't think it's every single thing equally. It's concentrated.
Yeah. Thanks for making that point. I'll just like very briefly say I wasn't trying to demonize all business. I was just I agree with you. I was more pointing to the systemic issues, right? And that businesses as an entity are under a ton of pressure, like economically, as you pointed out, to survive in a brutal like capitalist marketplace, right? And so there's an incentive structure there for them to act in a way that's not conducive towards the kind of changes that we're talking about. Not that them as individuals as problematic, but more their position within our economic structure, right?
Right. And then that's part of too with regulations of like if everyone's on the same playing field versus like it's optional. So if one business is like, we'll do things right, but it costs more money, and their competitors like, we're going to cut that corner and save a few bucks, and then your retail price on that business is lower. Like, yeah, that's a huge part of where that incentive structure starts to mess with things.
Sorry, I lost a bit connection for a second. I think agreement. Sorry, did you already ask your question? Otherwise, Santiago, you have a last question, and then it's going to be the hours. So.
Okay. So Agrimensor was ahead, but I don't know if he's not listening now. If you do jump in, because I already asked the question, right? And to some extent, this is an overlap of the previous question. So we need the world to change at a global scale, and yet most of the policies that Degrowth proposes and MMT proposes are at the country level, or some like even going down to the local level, right? The idea that we have more democratic institutions and mechanisms that go down to grassroots level. Do you think we could have a world where some countries adopt such policies and others stay behind and not adopt them at all? Do you think there's an inflection point after which, with enough countries, it's just unstoppable and every other country will adopt that? And if so, do you think, what are the key stepping stones to reach a global change? I know the policies themselves are very popular, but But if you had to change one country at a time, which are the countries that you would, of course, you would start with the global north, but within there, what drives you to change some and others? And do you have some examples today of countries that are implementing these policies well? I know at a more local level, there's quite a few examples, but they don't have the MMT capacity in that case. Sorry, long question.
Big question, Santi. Yeah, very briefly, you're absolutely right. That if we want a democratic economy, then we need power devolution both towards supranational organizations and down towards the local level. Because currently we have a world where power is mainly concentrated at the nation state level, right? But in order to achieve that future, then we need to think about the transition, as I was saying. So we need to think about how we overcome those power structures on the national level. And that's why I think that these national focused policies are important for the kind of what undergirds called revolutionary reforms, right? Reforms that will open up space for further transformation. Okay, and those are kind of the policies that we're talking about. If we think about if we talk about MMT, like MMT currently applies within our economies. We sometimes talk about like funded through MMT. No, MMT is just a lens for understanding our monetary systems, and it applies within our existing economies. It's just that it's not recognized, like as you know, right? And so in order to increase, for example, monetary sovereignty in the global south and allow them to actually have sovereign development, right? Then we need debt cancellation, to Marta's point, right? So I think that's a key, like that is a core demand, and it's why I think Debt for Climate is absolutely right in their analysis and their demand. It's just that we're going to need a lot of coordinated power and organization to achieve debt cancellation for the global south, right?
Thanks, Charles. So it's been an hour. Are you okay staying a few more minutes? Because I see, yeah, okay, cool. So Alicia, do you want to take the word?
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Charles, for your presentation. As Santiago was saying, these programs of degrowth are very connected to how it can be achieved in each of the nations and different proposals in different nations. And actually here in Spain, most of the debate is going in two directions. One is criticizing, green energy and, demonstrating the incapacity to obtain sources of energy, from non-fossil sources. And the other direction has to do with specific programs of degrowth, in which the discourse is very connected to the idea of communalism and return to communal lands as a way of developing like sovereignty and small structures of power and getting back to the power of the people and recuperating the lands that were stolen from them, basically. And actually, I believe that in many communities in the global south, it also has to do with going back to those models of autonomy and these ways of decision-making in in small groups, and going back to assemblies and going back to, recuperating the ecological diversity of the zone and so on. What do you think could be an appropriate model? And well, one thing that they say too is that these ways of organization are going to have to do away with expecting anything from the state. That are going to be ways of organizing outside of the state completely. What do you think would be an appropriate model to enter that conflict in a via that is not based on the state in the United States, which is, the belly of the beast?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alicia. I think you're absolutely right. We're seeing a massive backlash to green policies, not just in Spain, but in Europe. We see it most pressingly at the moment with the farmers' protests. Also here in Spain, where we are. And this again emphasizes the point that we need to do the social and the ecological at the same time, right? If we don't recognize that, for example, the farmers have justified grievances and that their lives are really difficult, and that they shouldn't be the only ones to bear the brunt of the ecological transition, right? Then we will go nowhere. So I think to your point, Alicia, like I actually think that we need to show that the state can be a force for good. Like you're right, there's a lot of skepticism in the use of state power, but I think that given the scale of the transformation that we're talking about, we will not achieve it purely through local initiatives, right? So we need to go back to the idea of revolutionary reforms. We need a state that can show that an ecological transition, that green measures can have social benefits, that the social and the ecological go together, right? And that could mean alleviating pressure on farmers in some kind of like agroecological transformation, right? It could mean a job guarantee here in Spain. It could mean increased spending on healthcare, because in Spain, for example, we have universal access to healthcare, right? But wait times are long. It's underfunded. It's difficult, right? If you meaningfully improve people's lives, then they could actually believe that the state could be a force for good. And I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alicia. Agrimensor, I don't know if you asked your question or your hand is... ¿No?
No.
Okay,
Hola, no he preguntado. Voy a hablar en
sorry.
castellano, así que voy a dar un poco de trabajo al traductora inglesa. He escuchado cosas que me han llamado mucho la atención, porque sinceramente yo, después de toda una vida siendo muy optimista, estoy en una época bastante pesimista. No creo que instituciones como el Banco Mundial o el Fondo Monetario Internacional estén del lado del decrecimiento, sino más bien de ese tipo de empresa que está tirando para adelante, digamos que acelerando el proceso. Entonces, de la misma manera, aquí en Europa, la Unión Europea está completamente cooptada por la gran empresa. Es más, ahora mismo se está viendo que los agricultores están protestando y una de las razones de sus protestas son los tratados de libre comercio que lleva años la Unión Europea negociando, que lo único que ponen es a la agricultura europea a exportar para traernos también productos de fuera, para que aquí haya, pues eso, ciruelas de Camboya o melones en invierno. Entonces, por desgracia, yo entiendo que las personas que estéis trabajando desde las instituciones tengáis que tener ahí un margen de optimismo hacia ellas. Yo soy bastante pesimista sobre su papel, precisamente porque veo que la ciudadanía no tiene cada vez menos influencia en ellas. Y hablas un poco de ese posible tercer partido en Estados Unidos, pero aquí en España tenemos una gran diversidad de partidos, pero nadie dice nada del decrecimiento, nada en serio, o sea, ni los partidos de más a la izquierda. Entonces, por desgracia, no espero mucho por ahí. Más bien, pienso un poco que hasta que no haya una catástrofe más gorda, no va a haber movimiento. Y entonces, un poco mi planteamiento es, tenemos que estar preparados para ese momento, preparados para conectar con la gente, o sea, intentar evitar que se nos vayan a la ultraderecha, que más o menos es lo que es el peligro que podemos tener ahora, ¿no? No sé, quería un poco contar esto y que nos cuentes un poco lo que opinas sobre ello. Porque por otro lado, tampoco creo que nosotros tengamos que pensar en el sur global. El sur global está pensando por sí mismo y los BRICS, el día menos pensado, van a romper la baraja del comercio mundial, cuando tengan, digamos, fuerza para hacerlo. Pero tampoco creo que tengan mucha intención de decrecer. Bueno, ahí lo dejo. No sé si se me ha entendido todo lo que he dicho, pero espero que sí.
Sí, gracias, Agrimensor. I'll answer you in English because my Spanish is not so good. I'm sorry. But I agree with you. The situation is not so great. And I completely agree that the IMF and the World Bank will never be forces for degrowth and social ecological transformation. Their power needs to be broken. Like this is quite clear, right? And I also agree with you that the European Union is essentially a cartel for business, right? But that we need transformation. We cannot just abandon these institutions and expect that they will not stand in our way when we come for social ecological transformation. So these are the power of these institutions needs to be redirected. It needs to be overcome if we are actually going to achieve degrowth. And I will just say that in Spain, until very recently, we did have a Minister for Consumer Affairs, Alberto Garzón, who is a degrowther. He's sympathetic with degrowth. So these ideas are filtering through, but we need more political power. And I agree with you, the situation is not great. But again, as Antonio Gramsci said, we need pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will, right?
Thanks, Charles. Gabriela?
Thank you. I'm from Ecuador in the global south. I don't speak English very well. But puedo hablar un poco español y un poco en inglés. Yeah, I want to clarify that I agree with the growth as a way out of the crisis. But I have two questions. Number one is, how can we think about the crisis in economies dominated by the financial and speculative capital that cause an acceleration in accumulation process, especialmente considerando that these capitals are also involucrados en green business. Is the question number one. The question number two is, do you think the crisis is possible in the north because the economic growth on the north and the south are related, relacionados? Entonces, ¿cómo pensar el decrecimiento frente a un capitalismo basado en la acumulación?
Sí, sí, por supuesto. Yeah, thank you so much, Gabriela. Your English is much better than my Spanish, so I'm sorry for that. And I agree with you. I think when we talk about degrowth, we mean degrowth in the global north that have excess material and energy throughput, and that in large part already have the institutions that are needed to ensure basic need satisfaction for everyone, right? Those institutions just need to be redirected. And in the global south, that looks different, right? Much of this infrastructure needs to be built. So I think degrowth in the global south means first and foremost ending ecologically unequal exchange. And what I mean by ecologically unequal exchange is the drain of energy, resources, and labor from the global south towards the global north. So the first step towards achieving degrowth is an end to debt and an end to that drain of energy, resources, and labor from the south to the north, which will allow the global south the freedom to develop in a sovereign manner. And this is key. And I think these ideas should not come from me, right? It's not me in Spain telling the global south how it needs to develop. These need to be decisions that are made in the communities that are affected by them. And I didn't completely understand your first question, so I don't know if you want to reiterate that. The connection was a little off, so maybe if you want to say that again. I didn't quite understand your first question.
Is the relation between financial capital and the growth. How can we think about it? Because the financial capital is speculative capital, and it accelerates the accumulation process. And how can we think it? I don't know, theoretically.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think if we talk about like monopoly, like finance capital in the ways you're describing, these are connected to the material flows that we're talking about, right? So confronting unequal exchange also means ending the cycles of extraction that are, as you said, linked to the financialization of capital in the global south, that are largely upheld by debt. So there are these key nodes in the system that need to be broken, right? And I think like debt cancellation, or it might also mean debt default, like a global front against debt, as Thomas Sankara used to talk about, are really important also for overcoming financialization in the ways you're talking about.
Thanks, Charles. Do you still have time for one more question?
Yeah, nice.
Good.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah, thank you for presentation and the debate. It has been really fulfilling, actually. I'm gonna bring a question that I've been kind of wondering the last week since I was in this webinar about geopolitics and degrowth that was held by, I don't know, it was this European organization past week. So I ended up a little bit worried about it because, like, I think that we are all in the same kind of like position that we feel that degrowth is the way to go. It's a tool to get into the post-growth war and so on. But when these people, they were talking about it, and they were also they had been researching a lot about the relationships between geopolitics like European and world geopolitics and degrowth. They were kind of talking about like neither China nor Russia or the US were into kind of like a degrowth or post-growth views. Whereas in Europe, we are starting to take it seriously, but the fact that we are kind of like on different gears, at different speeds on that could affect negatively how the world is gonna kind of like treat the European Union by itself. So kind of like talking about like, for example, we could not really conceive about like spending less money in kind of like arms, kind of like weapons, because that could be getting Russia's threat even bigger. But that would be one of the first steps into degrowth, not spending so much money onto kind of like useless things such as weapons. So I don't know if you have kind of like done some research about it, or what are your thoughts about the relationship between those geopolitical kind of like structures and what we are aiming for? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alberto. Very big questions to end on. I don't study geopolitics, and I wasn't present at the seminar you're referencing. But I would like to say that the geopolitics of degrowth is a very young field. There's not a lot of scholarship yet, so I think there are a lot of conflicting views. And I personally don't support the kind of European militarization that are coming out of certain quarters. I think that demilitarization is a key plank of degrowth, and I think that if we're talking about like imperial powers, then we need to take the role of the United States in the world very seriously, and that we will not achieve degrowth with the US pushing, as Gabriel was saying, pushing financialization through institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. We will not achieve degrowth through with the United States and its military bases scattered around the world. So if we want to talk about a key kind of a key obstacle right now towards social ecological transformation, it's United States foreign policy, and I think we should take that seriously.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Does anybody else have any more comments or questions? Third time, Santi, go for it.
Yeah, sorry. So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit. So I've heard Jason speak very optimistically about how when you give democratic control of the production to the people, they tend to go for things that are fair, not only within their context, but it would be more fair globally as well. But trying to be one step ahead, because the right is always a step ahead somehow. They manage to make things work against humanity. Is there a way in which they can use, and I guess to some extent they're already using the theory of modern monetary theory is what funds all the military interventions, right? They don't wait to collect taxes on that. They are ready to spend, and then they figure it out later how to pay for that, or to not cause inflation, or if it causes, it doesn't matter because they don't see the consequence. But can degrowth be used as a tool to keep oppressing people in the global south, or if the global north adopts only some of the growth policies? I can think of some European countries that have very high standards for the population, right? Like Switzerland has a very high standard, relatively low inequality within the people that are officially in the system, but still they are high contributors to a bad world. So do you think it could play in the wrong hand, some of these policies? Can they still be used to keep oppression in the global south and perpetuate this system of appropriation?
Yeah, thanks, Santi. I mean, Europe has a long history of forcing its ideas on the rest of the world to their detriment, right? But if it's degrowth, it means an end to that relationship, right? It means, as we said, sovereign democratic development in the global south. It means an end to unequal exchange. Degrowth will be decolonial, or it will be nothing, right? So if it's truly degrowth, it's liberatory, and it's not about perpetuating the cycles of oppression that maintain the imperial mode of living, as you were saying, here in the global north at the expense of everyone else.
But what are those key aspects that would, because I can imagine several of those policies working within a country without it being full degrowth.
Yeah, well, but this is why in the Real project we're working from the starting point that unequal exchange ends. So we stop the drain of resources, energy, and labor from the global south towards Europe. So we need to be developing policies, and this is also partly my job, right? That work for Europe without depending on unequal exchange, while at the same time imagining scenarios of sovereign development, in the global south, right? So I think that's a key starting point, is an end to unequal exchange, because policies, you're right, that we could imagine working time reductions in Europe while the rest of the world just continues to work 60-hour weeks, right? But that's not degrowth, right?
Thanks, Charles. Is there any last comment? Maybe just one more if anybody has, otherwise we can finish the session.
I just want to say it's been such a pleasure chatting with you all, and yeah, please reach out. Come have a coffee in Barcelona if you're passing through. It's been a real pleasure sharing this conversation. So, and thank you, Ornella, for organizing it, and thank you again for the interpretation.
Somebody asked for your email, Charles. Would you be comfortable sharing it?
Yeah, I'll send it in the chat.
Thanks. Excellent. So then I think we can finalize this session. It was amazing. Thank you so much, Charles, for your time and for this lively discussion. Also, I saved the whole chat because it's amazing all the resources we got. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to the interpreters as well.